It was a normal Friday night until it wasn't. That sentence is boring until you remember how small, ordinary choices can open a door to something terrible. These are 3 nights that began like any other: a co-worker's insistence to stay out a little longer, a scout tradition under a sky full of indifferent stars, a late shift, and a walk home on a route you've taken 100 times, and then narrowed down to a single sharp moment when everything changed. A spiked drink, a man on a dune, a regular who wouldn't take no for an answer. Each one is true. Each one came from the kind of places and people I thought I could trust. If you love true scary stories, hit subscribe. I've got 2 more that will haunt you. I remember every detail of that first night in St. Petersburg like it's a bruise. I'm not the one who goes out a lot. I like my couch, my books, the slow comfort of predictable evenings. Jenna and Mira work with me. They're loud in the way that makes everyone else quieter around them. Jenna's car was waiting in the lot because she'd volunteered to drive us home. She said she didn't want to stay, but then at the club she kept buying rounds, as if the drinks were a kind of glue, holding me to the bar. We took off our coats. The room smelled like spilled beer and citrus, and the kind of perfume that sticks in your throat. I took the first drink because it was offered. The second felt like the first, a little too cold, a little too fizzy. By the third, the music was a low tide against the concrete wall of my ribs. I noticed I couldn't focus on Mira's laugh. Colors got wrong edges. There's this small panic in the middle of your chest when your thoughts don't line up with the world, when your mouth can't find a sentence that should be there. I told them I needed fresh air. Jenna said, "Come on, we're leaving." She slid into the driver's seat. I thought the worst was over. The next few minutes are broken into sharp images. The club's parking lot, lights like distant beacons. My keys, warm under my palm. The feel of the door latch as it caught. Then nothing for pockets of time, like a film missing frames. I remember the car moving and not quite understanding how it started. I remember my hands doing things I didn't want them to do. Turning the radio up, then down, gripping the wheel, letting go. A cold sweat that came from the inside of me. Then there were 2 shadows by the passenger window, 2 hands on glass. I jerked awake to them, my vision a blown lamp. They were pulling at the handle hard, not gently like someone lost, but with a hunger that had no business being aimed at me. I tried the lock. It was stuck. My leg moved before my brain did. I slammed the car into gear and ripped away. I don't mean to sound heroic. I mean, I panicked and drove. The light smeared. Behind me, I heard a metallic bang against the door, a sound that was meant to make me stop. I didn't stop. I pulled over an hour later, or maybe at 5 in the morning. My phone screen blinked like a trapped insect, and I woke up on the driver's side, the engine off, the faint smell of spilled drink in the air. My head had a hollow place in it, like something had been scooped out. Dawn had that thin, merciless light that makes everything look smaller and more exposed. When I reached for the handle, my fingers met a jagged edge where plastic shouldn't be. The driver's side handle was gone. It was ripped from the door. There was a ragged hole where my escape had been controlled, where someone had tried to make sure I couldn't leave. Jenna called later, and her voice didn't match her face. When we finally spoke, she said something that landed like a stone. She seemed to glare at the memory until it crumbled. The drinks, she admitted, weren't meant for you. Not exactly in those words. She said it in a way that made meaning clear. She never used the phrase spiked, but the implication sat between us like a third person. She said it quietly, and then she said sorry in a way that didn't repair anything. I cut ties. There was no place to salvage the ordinary with the knowledge that something had been aimed at me by someone I thought I knew. Police came. They asked questions that made my mouth clumsy. They put fingers on the door and on the seat and asked what I remembered. There was an investigation. There were reports and phone calls that felt like being probed by bureaucracy, like a way to make the wound official. I have gaps in my memory that haven't been filled, and the world keeps offering small surprises that make me flinch. The click of a car door, a stranger's laugh too close in a parking lot, the way my hand hovers over a product in a store before I reach for it. Friends tell me not to carry the fear. They mean well, but the fear is a factual thing now, like a scar you can point to. It's there. It changes where you go, and how you get there, and who you bring. If you think that was isolated, wait until you hear about the dunes. We'd done the Baldy Man hike every year. It's a tradition that tastes like wood smoke and powdered cocoa, a ritual passed between troop leaders, a way to mark the end of summer. The sand dunes are a wide grey place at night, like the planet stripped of colour. We were a mix of younger scouts and a few ventures, older kids who look after the line. I was one of the ventures that night, moving slower than the kids, answering their small worries, looking at the sky when I needed to breathe. We split into smaller groups to scout ahead. 4 of us drifted from the main cluster to close a gap, catch up with the scouts who'd poked off toward a ridge. The dark makes everyone's features blunt. You get used to names and backs, to the way someone's backpack cuts across the horizon. Around the ridge, we thought we saw silhouettes. 2 other groups maybe, because people shadow into human shapes when you're already on edge. Later, Cormac and Alice, who'd been trailing the back, came up to us white-faced. "There was a man," Alice said, whispering like the dunes could hear. She traced fingers in the air as if sketching the man's route. "Hood up! He was circling the clearing. He wasn't with anyone." A practical fear passed between us, heavy and hot. Being out there with kids makes you earlier and rougher with instinct. We started doing head counts in a voice like a machine. 1, 2, 3, 4, no pauses. We pulled the kids close, voices folding into orders so they wouldn't panic. On the walk back, the dunes hid things until they didn't. A little scout screamed, a raw sound that made us all move, like something had been dropped into a pond. Noah, who had a steady eye, pointed toward a high ridge where a man stood like a silhouette on a tombstone. He was hooded. He wasn't moving the way someone who wanted to be seen moves. He was still in that way men are, who are watching to learn. Noah yelled and then froze. He saw something in the man's hand, and his voice broke. "A knife," he said. He said it like a fact, like a weather report, but the air turned wet with it. We didn't confront him. We couldn't afford to. We wrapped ourselves around the kids like a shield. We hurried them down the easiest route, counting and recounting. The man on the ridge watched us until we were too small to notice. We moved quicker. We moved methodically. Parents were waiting with the car lights and coffee and faces that said relief and terror at once. Someone called the police. Someone else wrote down what we'd seen. We never saw his face. He wasn't there when they came. There was no one to charge, no evidence beyond the memory of boots on sand and the flash of metal that could not be ignored. After that night, the troop added rules no one really wanted. Daylight hikes for certain routes, extra leaders on overnight trips, mandatory head counts at every interval. The children were shaken for weeks. Some parents stopped sending their kids on extra excursions. The thing that stays with me is not that we were scared. It's that the quiet places we trusted, the wide-open sand that should have felt safe because it was exposed, became a place where someone had chosen to be small and private and dangerous. It taught us how fast comfort can be hollowed out. It taught us to listen to the small alarms in our bodies and to treat them as real. The last story is the one I still flinch at in the middle of the night. I was 22, behind the bar at a dive that smelled like lemon oil and cigarette ash. Bars are ecosystems, faces that come on certain nights, orders that arrive like clockwork, stories that leave pennies under coasters. Jared was one of those regulars. He had a way of leaning on the counter as if the place owed him time. At first his presence felt like a compliment. People who remember you are often harmless. But then he started remembering too much. I gave him a drink and a tired smile. When his talk turned from casual to pointed, I tried to redirect. When it became insistence, I refused what he wanted. Dates, numbers, the wrong kind of attention. He laughed it off at first. Then he started to follow me home. At first it was a pace match, a silhouette a block behind me that mirrored my steps. It's an invasive, calculated thing to match someone's stride. You start to feel like the street is a treadmill you didn't choose. One night, as I walked up the short stretch to my building, I felt the hairs on my neck lift. He matched me again. I tried to speed up. He sped up. I stepped inside my lobby and pretended to sort my keys slower than necessary to look for witnesses. He stepped in too, as if he belonged. I told him, firmly and loudly, that he needed to leave me alone. He smirked and kept talking. When I went up the stairs, he followed. I made it to my apartment door. Fingers fumbling, heart hot and loud, I turned the deadbolt. He knocked. The knock wasn't polite. It was demand disguised as insistence. It had weight. He started slamming on my door, the kind of force intended to terrify, to make you come out. I could hear my neighbor from the hall yelling for him to stop. I could hear the banging through wood, the slaps of his palm like a metronome set to panic. I backed into the far corner of my apartment and texted a friend and the police, my hands moving like someone else's. He shouted something that couldn't be missed. He wanted in. I hid. I did not open the door. A neighbor intervened. Later they'd tell me they saw the whole thing and didn't like how his face looked, and that neighbor's presence, simple and small, was the thing that kept me from the next level of fear. Officers came. They took statements. They told me what to document. They told me about restraining orders and how to press charges. And I did. The system moved in its own slow way, calls and filings and the sealing paperwork that feels like a bandage. The court process started. An order was filed to protect me from him. It helped in a practical way to have that legal barrier, but the psychological perimeter wasn't so easily constructed. I stopped walking home alone after late shifts. I changed routines. I sat at the back of the bar sometimes and watched the door instead of just serving drinks. A neighbor put a spare key in a place that felt less like charity and more like a lifeline. Jared was arrested later. Charges were pursued. There were statements and courtroom chairs and an address that became a case number. I won't say the justice system fixed everything. No one would say that. What it did do was make him a record, something that could be pointed to in the future. That mattered. It mattered because the world sometimes requires a paper trail to take a human danger seriously. It mattered because it gave me a little breathing space to rebuild habits without being stalked at every corner. All 3 nights share a thread. The small domestic choices that felt safe at the moment and then revealed a fissure beneath them. A drink offered by a co-worker, a tradition on a dune, a stroll home after a shift. Each one had a pivot point where instinct kicked in. No one told any of us that moment would be simple. Instinct is not perfect. It can be noisy or vague. But in each case, paying attention to it mattered. It wasn't advice about what you should have done. It's a description of what actually helped. There are consequences beyond the night. There's legal aftermath sometimes, reports filed, restraining orders taken out, investigations that close with questions instead of answers. There's a different kind of aftermath that isn't on any form. The way you stop trusting the ordinary. You change your routes, your evenings, the way you answer a knock. Those are real, and they're heavy. They become part of your map. They are not failures, they are facts. I meet people who tell me they sleep with the lights on after a late shift or avoid certain streets because they can't stand the thought of being an open target. That response is valid. Survival isn't glamorous. It's mundane adjustments, a friend on speed dial, a note in your calendar for people to check in, leaving a little earlier, bringing a group. None of that is a promise. None of that guarantees safety. What it does is create more layers between you and a person with the intent to harm. These are true stories. They happened in places you know, bars, beaches, parking lots, and they involve people who were not monsters from film but neighbors, co-workers, strangers with easy smiles. Maybe you'll sleep with one light on after this. Maybe you'll walk with someone next time. Maybe you'll tell the story to a friend who still thinks it couldn't happen to them. I don't want to trade in fear. I want to make sure the fear is honest, not exaggerated or moralized. There's a certain clarity in the aftermath. You see who is willing to help, who shrinks away, who offers their key, a ride, a witness statement. That clarity is cold but useful. If these kept you awake, share them with someone who walks home alone at night. Tell a friend. Talk about what happened without making it into a horror show, just the facts, so that the people in your life can add a layer of caution without being taught to live in terror. And if you want more real-life stories like these, there's a playlist with others that will haunt you in different ways. Tonight, when you lie down and the dark grows heavy, remember this: ordinary moments can tilt into danger without warning. Trust the small alarms. Listen to the soft voice that says, "Something's off." That voice doesn't always save you, but it gives you a chance to act. And sometimes that chance is the difference between looking over your shoulder for a while and not returning at all. These are 3 true scary stories that started like any other night, and they're the kind that will keep you up all night.